One F1 driver forced a rule change because he had an unfair advantage. Another driver forced it as his victory celebration became too extreme. But we have to start with Max Verstappen, because what he did to Hamilton forced a rule change. Early in his F1 career, Verstappen aggressively moved under braking against Hamilton, stopping him from overtaking at the 2016 Japanese Grand Prix. This led to a brief outburst from the Mercedes crew. Verstappen argued that his moves were justified because he wasn't penalized at the time. However, after several other drivers also voiced their displeasure, the FIA made a rule change and declared that any moves made during braking, which requires the driver in the back to make a maneuver or cause an irregular direction shift, would be reported for investigation, and this rule earned the nickname Verstappen Rule. Damn, what a cool way to have a rule based on your name. But this Verstappen rule wasn't the only one that came into effect that season. Another rule was added that year which created a huge controversy, as it negatively affected Nico Rosberg's chances of winning the Drivers' Championship. At the start of the season, the FIA clamped down on pit-to-the-car radio, as they felt engineers on the pit wall were providing way too much assistance. However, this rule was called into question after Nico Rosberg got involved in an incident. 6 laps from the end of the race, Rosberg's W07 suffered a failure in transmission in the British GP, as he got stuck in 7th gear. Unable to get out of it, he radioed the Mercedes team to report a gearbox problem, as he was losing ground to Verstappen, who was running in 3rd. Mercedes then instructed him to attempt a different setting, before suggesting he should avoid 7th gear. Unfortunately, Rosberg asked whether he should shift through it, to which he immediately received the reply, yes, shift to 8th gear quickly. This exchange between Rosberg and Mercedes engineers was considered a rule breach and got penalized for it, and not only, he lost his 2nd position, but also reduced his championship lead over Hamilton to just 1 point. However, this radio ban rule later got lifted after the incident was later questioned by Mercedes and McLaren's Jenson Button, who also received a penalty for a similar reason. But while this rule was made to cut assistance from the pit wall, there was another rule made which negatively affected one particular team. In 2021, F1 issued a rule, setting a limit on how fast different parts of the pit stop can be completed. This rule definitely ensured that some actions were not allowed to happen faster than 0.15 seconds. Red Bull didn't like this, as they had the fastest pit stops in 2021. RB's advisor Helmut Marko even accused Mercedes of being behind this rule change. Mercedes is nervous and they're trying to slow us down. But despite their suspected involvement, Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff came out to defend the team and said, "We inquired with the FIA on a safety mechanism, which is related to a system that we were using, and whether that could be optimized. So, did that trigger anything else? Maybe. I don't know. But this is a question we've asked." However, as much as Red Bull had said against this pit stop rule, they had nothing to say when FIA forced another rule change because of none other than Max Verstappen himself. Verstappen would get alongside a competing car before a safety car restart. He did it against Leclerc, and even at the 2021 Abu Dhabi GP against Hamilton, just before the controversial final lap restart. This was risky, as it increased the likelihood of an accident, but later the FIA race director clarified the regulation change by stating that maneuvers like these ahead of a restart are now forbidden. But while this may be one of the recent rules enforced by Max, one of the firsts, the original Verstappen rule, made him sort of a record holder, as that thing can never be beaten by any other driver. Just 3 days after his 17th birthday, Max made his official Grand Prix debut. However, due to his early career driving antics and rise to F1, the FIA was forced to raise F1's age limit to 18, which means if the rule never changes, Max Verstappen will be and remain the youngest driver ever to make their debut in Formula 1. Now that's cool. But while Verstappen became a legend for so many rule changes, Ayrton Senna was also involved in a rule change, which later became a huge deal, as it changed F1's future forever. Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, two F1 legends and McLaren teammates in 1988, were the top 2 drivers with most victories shared as well. Prost won 7 races, scoring a total of 105 points, but still lost the championship to Senna, who only had 94 points in total after winning 8 races. See, originally, not all points scored by a driver or a racing team were counted towards a championship, and the reason for this anomaly was due to F1's scoring system at the time. And so, since only the top 11 races were taken into account in 1988, 87 of Prost's 105 points were used, while Senna had 90 points counted. However, this dropped point system was ultimately stopped, making Ayrton Senna the last world champion in 1990 under this system. Damn, what a champion! But while this rule change changed the future of F1, Lewis Hamilton forced the FIA to exempt him from one of the already placed rules, as he claimed it was due to a safety concern. At the start of the 2022 season, the FIA tightened the rule of not wearing non-compliant undergarments and jewelry, stating clearly that items beneath a driver's mandatory flameproof clothing could increase the risk of burn injuries. The FIA enforced this in a very confrontational way, but was still met with resistance from some drivers, particularly Hamilton, who even said that he was willing to skip the Miami Grand Prix if the ban was enforced. Explaining his reasoning, Hamilton said, "I've had my jewelry and my nose stud for years. At the time, it was soldered in, so it didn't come loose. They gave me at the time, for many races, an exemption until I could find a solution. Then I went and got it taken out. It got infected because of that, and I had a blood blister." The F1 champ also made it clear that he has a letter from his doctor to back up his claim, and ultimately, they were forced to exempt Hamilton from it. However, that wasn't the only time Hamilton forced a rule change, because another time when he did, the rule wasn't just for his team, but also for every other F1 team as well, who were forced to comply with it. In the 2022 F1 season, the FIA placed emphasis on downforce of all F1 cars, but unfortunately, this downforce emphasis caused many racing teams to struggle with porpoising, and it became so bad that Hamilton even needed assistance getting out of his car after suffering a back injury at the Baku race. Several drivers, including Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris, also lobbied about this struggle, but according to the FIA's rule, at least 8 out of the 10 teams to vote in favor are required to make changes to the rules. However, Hamilton's pain forced the FIA to intervene after they became worried about the physical distress arising from porpoising. But this mid-season change was met with strong opposition from teams and drivers as well, as they felt it was unfair. Talking about this, Charles Leclerc said, "I don't know exactly which data has been taken, but it's clear that when you look at Lewis getting out of the car after Baku, it doesn't look nice. But again, I think we should be careful, taking data from various cars and then see, because I don't think it's the same for everyone." Even more opposing was Verstappen, who blamed Hamilton and Mercedes for their porpoising issue. "I think it's a bit disappointing that again there is a rule change mid-season. It shouldn't be that one team is complaining a lot and suddenly then they change the regs around it. If you can't design the car properly for that, then that's your fault. It's not the regs' fault." For me, that's a bit of a shame. However, the FIA insisted their intervention was made based on safety and not in response to Mercedes' complaints. But I guess we can say that Hamilton's Baku condition was clearly a part of it. But turns out, safety's not the only reason for a rule change, because when Verstappen celebrated a race victory in a not-so-common way, the FIA enforced a rule change on it as well. According to F1 sporting regulations, to make any act of celebration, it must be under the following conditions: performed safely and does not endanger other drivers or any officials, does not call into question the legality of his car, and does not delay the podium ceremony. Interestingly, Max did not violate any of the 3 conditions when he did a burnout after winning the 2021 Styrian Grand Prix. But unfortunately, Michael Massey, F1's race director at the time, made it clear that the burnout celebration would no longer be tolerated. While Verstappen technically didn't break the rule, sometimes F1 drivers stretch the rules too much and still get away with it. But when Michael Schumacher stretched the rule to its farthest extent, it forced the FIA to intervene. After coming out of retirement, Schumacher competed for Mercedes, who was behind Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren on the grid. But at the 2011 Monza race, McLaren's Lewis Hamilton was involved in a wheel-to-wheel battle for 30 laps with Schumacher, and the German driver defended very aggressively, as he made more than one change in direction, forcing Hamilton to take drastic actions and jump through the grass. Surprisingly, Schumacher's aggressive driving was within the limit of the rules, which enraged Hamilton, and also forced an FIA review. As a result, the FIA made it clear that a driver could leave the racing line and return, provided he leaves a car's width space, and that a driver can only make one change of direction. But even if Hamilton couldn't stand Schumacher at that time, Lewis also has some drivers who can't stand him either. One driver said that he's an idiot. Another driver even said that Lewis still doesn't know how to drive. But who are these drivers? And what do they actually think about Hamilton? I know you want to hear more about this, so just click the video right here.